Alright, doing the build overview for my ward stacking Smite Slayer character. Basically the way this build works is you get a bunch of ward, you have night grip gloves which give you added chaos damage equal to 10% of your ward, makes your ward less valuable defensively, whatever, but that's essentially the idea. A lot of chaos, and that's where we scale our damage. I am playing this character in softcore trade. The build is definitely HC viable. I planned it originally around HC, but then just some of the stuff wasn't really. Mainly, this belt wasn't available in HC. I think the still is not any available in HC trade. But if you can get the belt and the other gear and stuff, which I'll cover when I go over all the gear, it is an HC viable build for sure. I've died a handful of times, 6. One of them was from HC to SC when this was a different character, so I've died 5 times. And I think all of those, pretty much really all of those, are me just putting in crazy maps that I wouldn't be attempting in HC because I just know that they're bad ideas, but I'm just kind of pushing things to the limit. But yeah, so overall, HC viable for sure. You just, play it like you're in HC. Most ward stacking builds, at least in my experience and knowledge, kind of have a reputation of being like super glass cannony, high damage, but no defense. This character is actually very, very tanky. That was the goal. I didn't want to go too crazy on ward because there are ward builds I can get way more ward than this. But I think this is enough, and then we can still have really, really good defense. Part of that was the original plan on this was to be a gladiator for gladiator block stuff, which I am still block stuff even though I'm on a slayer. It just turned out I realized pretty quickly through POBing that even playing a block build, slayer just ends up better. Gladiator just isn't very good. I don't know. The build is not like cheap, but it's also not crazy expensive. My character, which I'm pretty much completely done with gear outside of if I wanted to double corrupt some uniques or get like a synthesis ring with +1 frenzy charge. Um, Otherwise, I'm basically, I got all the gear I want, all the gear I need for everything. And I think all in all, I'm in like 120, 130 or so divines. That includes, gems, that includes flasks, that includes grafts, all that. 120, 130, somewhere in that neighborhood of divines. And I think some stuff costs, or a lot of things cost less than when I bought it. +1 frenzy on these gloves seems to be going up slowly over time, though, so just an estimate. I think you can get in SC trade a pretty good start on this for like 30, 40 div, somewhere in that neighborhood will get you pretty good going. You'll give up some defense. I'll go over specifics of what you could give up on a lower budget when I go over the gear. But before all that, I want to put a map in. I just got T17 here. I was doing some box farming, so I have a max map mod effect atlas, so it's just going to boost all the map mods, and I grabbed one with some good mods to kind of show it off. Extra life, extra damage, frenzy charges, shrined up bosses. The only thing, this also does have grasping vines, which is going to slow the map down a bit, but that's T17s. What you can do? Just show off the T17 and how it works. Not putting any actual boxes on this map because that would add a lot of time. Just show the actual clear of just playing kind of more normally. Now, for map stuff on the character, you can kind of do every map mod if you really wanted to. Though, the no leech mod is pretty much unrunnable. You would have to put a mana flask on, and it's just really bad. But there's not anything that you strictly can't do. That is one that I would never recommend doing. But that being said, there are a couple other ones that I'm not going to ever run, and you want to keep an eye out for, and that would be like less recovery. That just kind of completely screws up your health sustain. And then less defenses. Not because of anything that you would normally think of with less defenses, but it makes you get less ward. So it like completely screws up your damage, especially if you are doing high map mod effect maps. As you can see, very tanky. We can just kind of stand in the face of this. Again, these bosses have shrines, they have extra damage, they're getting frenzy charges. And the boss also has like 150% more life or whatever. And we can just tank it. Very, very good stuff. Let's go clean up the rest of the outside loop here. Or, on second thought, let's go ahead and leave. I don't feel like dealing with the breach. Alright, so Before I get into the gear and the specific stuff, let me quickly cover ward as just a mechanic, because a lot of people don't really know exactly what ward is doing and how it works and all that, because it's not really a thing you see very often. By default, what ward does is you have your ward, whatever the number is. When you get hit, you lose all of your ward, no matter how much the hit does, and the ward will absorb that hit up to however much ward you have. So you have, 2,000 ward and you get hit for 5 damage, all your ward's gone. If you get hit for 2,000 damage, all your ward's gone. If you get hit for 2,500 damage, all your ward's gone, and you take 500 damage. Right? So that's how it works normally. The gloves kind of throw a wrench into it because they have 75% of damage taken bypasses ward. So if you have 2,000 ward and you get hit for 2,000, 1,500 of it's going to bypass your ward. 500 is going to hit the ward and your ward's going to deplete. So essentially what happens with the gloves, once you have high amounts of ward, which you generally will because you want to stack it with the gloves to get the damage, it basically makes it so that your ward blocks 25% of a hit. So when you get hit, 25% damage reduction. But if you paid attention in that map, my ward may not have broken. I don't think it did. It probably didn't break a single time that whole map. That is because the other thing that we have interacting with it is from the Olroth Ascendancy. This note here, one of the things on it says, damage taken bypasses unbroken ward if the hit deals less damage than 15% of the ward. So basically, smaller hits that do less than 15% of my ward, which right now is like, 1,600 or whatever. If a hit does less than that, it just fully bypasses always and just hits my life or whatever normally. Which is good because that means the small hits don't get rid of our ward and our ward is always there when we do take a big hit. And then combined with block, that means that the chance for the ward to be available in between big hits is much higher because if I'm not going to take a ton of big hits in a very small period of time usually. So it works out really well in our favor. And so on this character, what all that turns into is ward doesn't do anything on small hits. When we do take a big hit, we get 25% damage reduction against big hits. And that works really well because our health pool is not super high outside of when we have the molten shell up from the graft. But granted, that molten shell is almost always up anyway. Yeah, okay, so now into the gear of the build. The main core, again, is by default the gloves, which mine have corrupted +1 frenzy. Not necessary, but it is a really good corruption. You just need a pair of gloves. The rolls on the gloves don't really matter all that much. Like, you can increase the implicit flat ward on it, but that's barely where any of your ward is coming from. If I take these off, my ward goes down by 250. The main thing is this into stand, which gives you ward instead of 60% or by default 50% of armor and evasion from your body armor, and then combining that with a body armor with as much armor and evasion as possible. So you don't necessarily need full tier 1s if you're like trying to put a build together of the prefixes, but you want as much as possible because again, this is basically where all your ward is coming from. Mine even has the heist tailoring orb enchant for some extra defense modifiers. This is our flat ward source, and then this again by default it's 50%. You can quality it with defense quality and get up to 60%, so you get even more there. And that's the core. So we can scale the ward a bit by increased ward mods, which is pretty much just from the Ascendancy here, or global defenses. So one of the uniques I have is this double Foulborn Lay Hoop, which gets up to 30% global defenses. And that's also a pretty big boost to the ward because we don't really have that much percent increase to the ward. So the sources that we can find are really, really nice and really valuable. And then it also gets crit multi, which is great because we're going crit. And the all attributes and all res are also both very useful. Like if I take this off, it's gonna, yeah, I need the all attributes because I need it to wear my gear. Weapon is a Paradoxica since we're getting tons of flat from our gloves. We have the just deal double damage and you can get some Chaos Pen, and then the attack speed's obviously ideal here. The quality bonus, I have crit chance. I think the attack speed one's almost the same DPS, but either way, just one of the quality bonuses that switches that up there because you don't really need the flat fizz that's built in. And then the last unique we're wearing here is a double Foulborn Oppressor. This is just like a really insanely good defensive shield when you get the double Foulborn, and it specifically has to be double Foulborn. Like, technically, you could have just a single Foulborn Lay Hoop without crit multi, but I don't know why you would be doing that. They're not too expensive compared to other things you're going to be spending on. If you only have one of the Foulborn mods, this shield just isn't worth it because the 30% chance to block spell damage is part of what makes it really, really good. And then the 11% chance that mine has to avoid all damage, that's fine. It's a good mod. It's not bad. But more importantly, it deletes one of the negative mods. I forget exactly what the mod is, but it gets rid of a bad mod on the shield that makes it worse. So you need both. And this is a really expensive item for sure. I think I spent like 18 or 19 div for mine with a max spellbox roll. They've maybe gone down a bit. I'm not sure. I haven't looked. But this is also an item that if you're on a budget starter, you could skip to start. Just get like a rare shield with some suppression and block mods on them, and just you just have less suppression and less block and whatever. But to get started, you could save a lot that way. And then let's do the rares. So again, the body armor. The big thing is getting the good prefixes for armor and evasion. Eventually, if you're going the full max investment, everything, whatever build, you also need suppression on all three of your rare pieces that can get suppression. You need the max tier suppression rolls to get capped. And then mine also has, I tried to unveil for a hybrid res or maybe strength plus int. Unfortunately, I didn't hit a very good unveil. I just got strength, kind of. But still works out fine. Good enough. Helmet is pretty basic. Life, suppression, resists. I bench crafted +1 AoE, which the +1 isn't really doing that much. Like +1 to Tempest Shield. Doesn't even have AoE, actually. It doesn't matter. +1 to Flesh and Stone, I think gets maybe 1% less damage. Pretty small. +1 to Precision is pretty nice. But more so the 10% AoE is nice because we don't actually have that much percent increased AoE for our smites. It doesn't need it that much, but just didn't need any other prefixes. And then boots, super basic, life, speed, res, suppression. And then these do have ailment avoidance implicit, which you need once you get like cap suppression with ancestral vision to get full ailment avoidance, which I'll show when I'm on the tree. Amulet is just life and res and all attributes. You can also do, instead of all attributes, it could be strength plus int on an unveiled version mod. But I think all attributes is actually just kind of easier to come across. But you don't really need the dex that it's giving. You need the other two. And then I have bench crafted minus cost. Same with the ring. Bench crafted minus cost, and the ring is otherwise just life res. I did hit a lucky warlord slam and get melee damage, which isn't as crazy as it seems. Like on our single target, basically half of our damage counts as melee. The other half comes from the AoE hit, which does not get scaled by melee. But it was still a decent slam nonetheless. That's all the gear. The grafts, I have a Heart of Flame, very important because since the health pool isn't actually that high, the way that this becomes super, super tanky against hits is by having Heart of Flame up a lot. Because this thing can absorb basically as much damage as we normally have as health, so it's like doubling how much we can get hit from a single hit and live. I got a really, really good one now that has CDR and skill effect duration. To get started, you definitely want high tier cooldown reduction. I think that's the better of the two if you have to pick between one. And then obviously graft blood gain is great if you want to get more blood for your thing. Attack damage is a good prefix as well. But getting the cooldown recovery rate high tier and skill duration high tier, you can get essentially 100% uptime on this, assuming it doesn't get broken early. You'll see it in a second. This is combined with the rune graft of the warp, which makes buffs expire slower, so you can see they're ticking down a little bit slower than 1 second per second. But as soon as this drops, it's going to just immediately come back up. And that's because I have both of the mods. And then the other one is the Overcharged Sinews from a Jolting Esh craft. So this gives you more max attack damage at the cost of increased damage taken. Now, more max attack damage actually isn't very good for us because Night Grip gives minimum and maximum damage of the same number. Like if I mouse over my skill, I have 31k to 31k, that's the range. Gaining more max attack damage is actually more beneficial when when your max is already a lot higher than your minimum. So we don't gain a ton compared to other builds, what they would from this. But it still ends up being good because of the rolls you can get on the graft itself. So like specifically the plus 4% crit multi per stack. Since it stacks up 10, this is giving 40 crit multi. My prefix on it gives me 12 attack and cast speed. My other suffix is just skill effect duration, which isn't actually needed because you can maintain the stacks on these really easily without that. I haven't tried to get a better one because there are some other things. You could get increased max jolt stacks. I think it goes up to like +4 extra jolt stacks, which would give you another small boost of damage, but again, more damage taken. Or I think there's one that's like 1 or 2%. I think it's 1% movement speed. Like there's some other suffixes that you could get, but the main one is getting the crit multi and then a good prefix like attack and cast speed. And then I got chance for ancient womb gifts, which may or may not be bugged at the moment. I have no idea. I swear I got this, and then I was getting so many ancient gifts, and I was like, "Hey, it works. It's fine. This is cool. I'm getting so many." And then the next day, somebody goes, "Hey, you know that mod's bugged, right?" And I'm like, "No, I got a ton. That was fine." But then from then on, after somebody told me it was bugged, I swear I'm barely getting any ancient womb gifts anymore. So I don't know what's going on there. Flasks, last bit on the gear kind of stuff. Just a quick silver flask, silver flask. This is a ward flask if you haven't seen this before. Just a magic one. It has one of the suffixes can roll increased ward during effect, so I go from 10.5 all the way up to 12.2. Big boost in ward, big boost in damage. And it also refills your ward when it gets used, but that doesn't really matter. It's basically just to get the ward boost when it's up. And then I also have the Wine of the Prophet, just generally kind of insane, unique flask. Not needed. This is one of the things you can skip early on when you're trying to get the gear. Even though it's super good, I would actually recommend skipping it until you can get a good baseline of your gear set up. Before I was running this, I just had a quartz flask. I wasn't suppression capped yet, so quartz was really nice to get a bit of that extra suppression, and then the phasing is always welcome. And then just life flask. Alrighty, that is all of the gear. Moving on to the gems. So Smite of Divine Judgment. Not using regular smite because since we're getting all our flat chaos and we're scaling flat chaos, we don't care about any of the flat lightning that regular smite would give, so we just do Smite of Divine Judgment, which does more damage. This could be a Vol Smite technically, like if it was a 21 level 21 20 quality Vol Smite, and then you would have the Vol Smite to press occasionally, which does get like a bigger AoE clear on one button press. I just didn't bother because I think they cost a ton and it's not really necessary. And again, the buff doesn't really matter. So just like I have a 21, 23, but the 23 is no different than or maybe it's a little better, but the 23 quality doesn't really matter. Crit strikes, crit damage. Need both of the need crit strikes because Paradoxica doesn't get a ton of crit. Crit damage really good. Multi strike really good. I have Awakened Ancestral Call here for mapping. If I was going to switch to bossing, I would put damage on full life in its place. And then Void Manipulation as the last one. The one thing when I've been doing these T17s, I think I have this now, yeah. I have the attack mastery for monsters can't block your attacks because one of the T17 mods gives them a ton of block chance. If I was going to go do some bossing and I was going to take Ancestral Call out, I would need to switch this over to the +1 additional strike, since you need to have at least one additional strike to get your proper target DPS set up with Smite, which is basically you hit the ground next to the boss and it hits it with the AoE, and then your additional strike actually melees the boss, and that's how you get one melee plus one AoE from a swing. Other gems, I have an auto exertion here, which is linked to General's Cry Blade Flurry with extra damage support. This actually adds quite a lot of damage. The auto summon Blade Flurry clones, surprisingly strong. The one thing about this though is General's Cry does need corpses to function. It doesn't consume them, but it does need them, so we do have a Desecrate. That basically when I go to boss, cast it once, and then as long as you don't move around too much, you just need that one. You don't need to keep casting it. But yeah, it gives actually a lot of a damage boost. And then in the helmet, I have my other auras, Tempest Shield, Flesh and Stone, Precision. The Enlighten is pretty important, level 3. Without the level 3 Enlighten, I can't really run all of those plus the auto exert, so that was a pretty important thing. I didn't have it initially, so I spent a while playing without having my auto exert. And then when I got the Enlighten and I put this on, I was very surprised how much my single target damage went up from having the Blade Flurry dudes just go off on bosses. And then Weapon just has Shield Charge with faster attacks and the Frost Blink, mobility skills. Shield has Mark on Hit Assassin's Mark with a Blood Rage. And then the Boots has, I have a Vitality here. This is like kind of a flex gem slot. Don't really need that one. But then Enduring Cry, this is just to get endurance charges on bosses if needed. Desecrate, and then a self-cast Despair, which we combo with Balance of Terror. So the reason I have a Vitality is because I was buying a 2-mod Watcher's Eye for double precision mods, and the one I bought happened to also have this Vitality mod of life recovery rate. Wasn't planning on it, just saw it when I was looking for double precision, said, okay, that's cool. And so I got a level 1 vitality to activate that. Before that, what I was running here was just a faster casting to make the Desecrate and the Despair cast a little bit quicker. But honestly, at this point, the Despair cast's plenty fast, and the Desecrate cast plenty fast, and the Despair's not bad either, so it's fine. Vitality works out. That is all of those. Time to move on to the tree. There's a lot going on the tree. So first off, Ascendancy stuff. Slayer, Slayer Leech, Slayer Frenzy Charge, very good. And then the last one's just some, the generic damage, good stuff. It does also give you Fizz Reflect immunity, so we don't have to worry about Fizz Reflect maps. And then we have the secondary Ulroth Ascendancy with the bottom nodes. The main reason for these is actually just the increased ward here and then the increased ward here. So it's a total of 55%, gives us a huge chunk of our ward. But like I mentioned earlier, the damage bypass on this this notable here is pretty great too, because it makes our ward not get eaten away by small hits. Then before I cover the other specifics of the tree, I'm going to go over all the jewel sockets because there's a lot of unique jewels. Watcher's Eye, again, it's a Watcher's Eye. Do what you will with it. Precision mods are good for damage. More precision mods is more good. Light of Meaning, Chaos damage. This is quite a good chunk of increased damage here, but also this is decently expensive. This is probably one of the things that I would skip out on a lower budget. And then going down this way, this is the one rare jewel I think I have, just life, and I do have some all-res on it, which is pretty nice. It gets me a bit more overcapped without having to worry about that elsewhere. And then just damage mods. One replica Reckless Defense. Need that to hit my block caps. I think you can hit attack block cap. Oh, I don't have my Tempest Shield turned on. You can hit attack block cap without this probably, just by having higher rolls elsewhere. But the spell block cap you wouldn't be able to quite hit. And then right here, a Thread of Hope. This one's one of the more important jewels to get. It's getting these Frenzy and Endurance Charge nodes, which are both pretty good. The Endurance Charge one actually lets us get Endurance Charges while we clear without having to use Enduring Cry. A really nice block node. A really nice leech node to make our leech rate faster. And yes, those four notables really good. And then over to this one, we have the Balance of Terror, which with the self-cast Despair gives us our Wither on hit. That's our source of Wither. You can't get a double Despair one. The second Despair mod makes you immune to curses in general, I think, which would be nice. But I think I looked and they were like way, way, way more expensive, so I decided to just skip out on it. And then I have a Foulborn Ancestral Vision, which gives the normal Ancestral Vision mod of ailment avoidance, and then this one also gets up to 10 suppression, which is like insane. Getting started, you do not need the extra suppression Foulborn. You can just get a regular Ancestral Vision. Even if you're not going to get fully to 100% avoidance, I was actually playing for a while with like, I think 80 or so before I got my suppression capped and before I got my boot implicit up to the max tier. But just playing with like 80 or so chance to avoid, normally I wouldn't bother with something like that unless I was getting all the way, but since the Replica Reckless gives you a chance to be frozen, shocked, and ignited, felt like having the little bit of extra chance to avoid, even though it wasn't capped, was going to be pretty nice. That's all the jewels. So the tree itself, I do have a couple suppression, or I think 3 suppression tattoos. That helps me hit my suppression cap. And then some other tattoos on the decks because we have a lot of extra dexterity. I grabbed a few cold res, which was nice. I grabbed 1 mark effect. I think I could get another 1. I could get exactly, I think, 1 more of those and still have enough dex to use my helmet. Mark effect just gives a little bit more damage than, just what a 10 dex would give for single target. But then I don't have any other tattoos. Can't really tattoo the strength because I might be able to tattoo 1 strength node, but don't really want to bother. I do have some rune grafts. The big one here, Rune Graft of the Fortress, another big global defenses mod. Again, all the global defenses we can get really good, lots of ward. And then Rune Graft of the Warp, which, again, the main purpose for this one is making the Breach Molten Shell last longer, because we want that up all the time, since it's a huge boost to the total character health pool. Other than that, just kind of traveling this bottom part of the tree, grabbing some block, grabbing life where we can. Using Acuity as our 1 accuracy bit. Some more block and damage over here, crit nodes, a little bit of suppression. And then to the left side, a bit more interesting, we have the Fortify. This is where we're getting our melee hits Fortify, getting our Rage on hit. And then 2 Cluster Jewels. So they're almost the same, the mods that I have. which they both have the Gladiator's Fortitude, which is just kind of a really nice, notable life and some damage, and then Martial Prowess, which is just good suffix. The accuracy is actually pretty critical here too to get fully capped out on chance to hit. But then one has Fuel the Fight, and the other one has Feed the Fury. Now the one with Fuel the Fight is like mandatory. It's the only source of mana leech for the character. However, the Feed the Fury, we actually do get life leech from the small node on Slayer, so you don't actually need it. But it's just a really, really good notable on Slayer since you're leeching all the time, so it's 30% damage, 15 attack speed. Just like a huge, crazy, crazy boost for one notable, right? I think that covers the whole tree. One more thing to mention before I leave the passive tree is I'm not using any, but you could do a Forbidden Flesh, Forbidden Flame combination. The main problem right now is I only have one rare jewel, which means I would have to drop a unique jewel to set up the combination. Not really any other jewel sockets nearby to quickly grab to do it. So I think you would either just be dropping the Watcher's Eye, which if you have a 2 mod is going to be a lot of value. Same thing with like trying to drop the Light of Meaning, it's just a lot of damage. Maybe you could weasel some spell block somewhere and get block capped without Replica Reckless Defense. That's, I think, the more likely thing is figuring out how to do that. And then that plus the ritual. Not dropping Balance of Terror. I mean, if you don't want ailment immunity, you could drop Ancestral Vision, but I wouldn't be doing that, and I definitely wouldn't be dropping the Thread of Hope. But for Forbidden Flesh, Forbidden Flame combos, you could pick any of the Slayer nodes that we're currently running. Which one has the least useful? Really, the small nodes on any of them are about the same, but you could drop any one of these and then get it with Forbidden Flesh, Forbidden Flame, and use that extra node to grab this small ward node plus this notable, which what I would do on this one, I wouldn't take the chance to restore ward. I would take the 30% less from damage over time while you have unbroken ward, because damage over time is one of the actual sources of damage that is consistently scary if there's like a really strong dot, since we can't block it and our sustain. We do have Slayer Leech, but our total health pool isn't super high. So that thing could be quite good actually. Other than that, if you were like real crazy, you could get the Gladiator nodes of the luck block chance. So you would just grab the combo for those. And then you have Lucky Block, and with 75 block up to Lucky Block, it goes up to, I forget, 90 or some crazy high number of block chance. But those are really expensive. Like I think 30 div or more for each one, so like 60D for the pair or some crazy number like that. But you could do it, and you would have Lucky Block if you've blocked recently, so you'd be even less likely to get hit by anything, which is cool, I guess. But yeah, so that's an idea. That's an option. Forbidden Flesh, Forbidden Flame. And I think with that, covered everything. I could touch on the Pantheons. Need Brine King for stun immunity. And then Ralakesh is just good. That's everything. That is the character. That is the build. It's been very fun. Character is really strong. Very satisfied. Very happy with how it has worked out. I'm going to probably be playing this guy for another day or two before working on whatever the next one may be, which I'm looking at a cold dot build with a Foulborn perfect form, and then probably a Foulborn Wrathpith and stack like life and cold res. That's kind of what's brewing for the next idea. But for this one, that's it. That's the build. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Goodbye.